everybody. Well, welcome. Glad you guys can make it. Glad we could be here at the New Earth Health Cafe and kick this thing off right. I'm thankful that you're all here, too. I think it's great that you're taking this interest in your health. And I think that's what's really going to allow you to get healthier and healthier is when you empower yourself by seeking out your own knowledge and continue to work on improving your health. And it's a long road. It's not just a one-stop thing or one little cleanse or one little detox that's going to change things around all the time. But a lot of times it's a constant path, and we've got a long road to walk as far as how healthy we've been, how healthy our culture's been, and how healthy our world is right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of go through kind of an abridged version here, and maybe Amanda can cut me off around a half hour or so. So hold your questions if you have any questions, and then we'll open up the rest of the evening for questions after that. This is about 30 slides. That's taken out of about 90 pages of notes that I have and about 20 years of experience. So there's a lot that we can go into. I'd love to hear what your guys' questions are or concerns and things like that, and we'll go into that at the end. All right? Now, I call it a cleanse and weight loss program. Most people come to me for this, for weight loss. That's the big drive for a lot of people. But more and more I'm seeing people also realize that other health issues that they're having, whether it's autoimmune diseases, cancer, heart disease, things like that, they're realizing that they need to address their diet and lifestyle. And that's what this is really about. It's about creating a healthier lifestyle, finding out what you need to do for your specific health at this time, how to track it to find out what's working for you and what's not, and how to get healthier and healthier and healthier year after year. Okay? Some of the challenges that our children face, we are also facing now, but what this also does is it lets us know how to be healthy and how to create that healthy example for our children, so that as we're raising children, we're raising them healthy and they have the best chance possible in an incredibly toxic world to succeed and to be healthy. Right now, there's all sorts of chemicals, hundreds of chemicals have been shown to cross the placental barrier and get into the fetal bloodstream while the children are in utero. If the mother breastfeeds, she receives another, the child receives another 65% of the mother's toxin load that's stored in their fat. Okay, and we're going to get into the detox aspect of our program where we go after that fat and those toxins that are stored in fat. In addition to that, as they come out, they're exposed to all the drugs and toxins that are in our air, water, and soil. But since their respiration is 4 times that of ours, they're exposed to 4 times the amount of toxins in our air, water, and soil. In addition to that, there's increasing levels of background radiation and even more stuff coming as down the pipe as time goes on that our children are having a challenge with. So all these things that we're learning maybe to lose weight or to feel a little bit better have radical effects when we apply these towards our children's diet and lifestyle, and can reverse all sorts of major illnesses and things like that children are facing these days. And that's my little boy Bodhi there, and he's doing really, really well. And of course, his mom and me did a lot of detoxing and stuff like that before he was born, and so he's pretty healthy. Okay, a little bit about me and a little bit about, why is a chiropractor talking about, dieting and cleansing and weight loss? Where does this come from? I grew up in suburbia in Phoenix, Arizona for the most part, and had the typical standard American diet. My folks were from Jersey, and we had, Wheaties was our health food. We had that in the morning, but, mostly I got like a peanut butter crunch, and then for lunch I'd have bologna and cheese on white bread with mayonnaise, our peanut butter and jelly, the Jif and the Skippy and all that kind of stuff. And then for dinner, we'd have a huge spread of meat, and I didn't like anything green until I was 18, I think. I don't think I had any vegetables ever cross, me, unless they were like really hidden in the meat. And that's how we lived, and everybody around us lived like that. And so what happened was I moved away. I went down to the University of Arizona, okay? And I had to, support myself and started realizing, wow, meat's expensive, milk's expensive, what's going on? And I started to, studying ecology and evolutionary biology down there. And so I was like, well, let's look at the ecology of the human body. Like, what do I really need to live? And so I started to explore things like vegetarianism and, went out to like Indian food restaurants and Thai food restaurants. And I was like, oh my gosh, vegetables taste good. And like, wait, they don't have to be pulled out of a freezer freezer and thrown in a plastic bag and boiled in water. I mean, that's how I got vegetables, and you can see why I didn't eat any when I was growing up. And so I became a vegetarian for about 5 or 6 years while I was in school. And a neat thing about what I was studying is I was learning about all the health systems of our planet at that time, and how the ecosystems are interdependent aspects with the physical systems like the air, the soil, the water, the weather, the spinning. All of that works to create health in an ecosystem. And how the ecosystems in the earth is always trying to create more life, more energies, trying to kind of keep that going through. We try to do the same thing when we're healthy. We want to have more energy, right? We want to be able to do more. We want to have more life. And I started to see a lot of the parallels between the health of our planet and how it works, and the health of the human body and how it works. So I started to explore all the different things that were out there around this time about, health. And, everybody had a different opinion about what sort of supplement you should take. And then, one week it was this one, the next week it was goji berries, and after that it was quinoa, and then it was like, no, you shouldn't have quinoa, you need more vitamin E, no, you shouldn't have vitamin E, and it got a little overwhelming, and I'm just like, wait a minute, there's got to be a way to make sense of all this, What is it that humans need? What is it that we thrive off of? And I really learned here in studying evolution, okay? Why is it that some plants we can take into our body and they can kill us? Other plants we take into our body and it gives us energy. Our body knows how to use those chemicals, and it's just a slight rearranging of those chemicals. After the University of Arizona, I spent some time studying ecology out in the riparian areas, or the river areas in the deserts of Arizona and New Mexico. Then I started to teach kids about the outdoors after that. Then I was an organic gardener for a while, so I started to realize about what it takes to grow food and what it takes to grow healthy organic food. And the importance of soil again came back into my understanding. And a lot of times when I look at a complex problem in the body, such as excess inflammation, autoimmune diseases, cancer, things like that, I kind of address it almost like I did when I was addressing poor plant health in my garden. What's going on in the soil, right? What is our soil in our bodies, right? It's our tissues, it's our cells, okay? And what makes up the soil in a garden is fungus, bacteria, and vertebrates. What makes up the life-giving abilities of our cells, a lot of it has to do with the microorganisms that live inside of us, the bacteria, the yeast, and the fungus, and the balance that needs to be created in there, just like a balance needs to be created in our garden. And of course, Rob and Rishi and Eva have been doing a great amount of work, like really cultivating those sort of things in our food so that we can keep those in there. After that, that's when I went to chiropractic school, and that's when I started to learn about research. And I started to learn that, like, even if, a news article or a magazine article says that scientists, now think that white bread is much healthier for you than, wheat bread, there's a reason why they're saying that, and you need to look a little bit deeper, right? There's different levels of evidence out there in the scientific literature, and there's a whole tier, right? So you can look at certain statements and look at that study and say, wow, that carries a lot of weight. Other things don't carry a lot of weight. So I was able to use my understanding of science and research while I was at school to start to look at where all this information was coming from as far as what we really need to be healthy and what we don't need to be healthy. And then I was able to put that into the background of human evolution, okay? Evolution, what I mean by that is the interaction between our genes and their environment. So our genes are little codes of DNA, little instruction manuals in every single one of our cells, and we have trillions of them, hundreds of trillions of genes in our bodies, okay? And what they are doing, they're the instructions for how we can survive and pass those genes on to our children, right? And so that they can survive. So our genes have instructions how to make us the healthiest individual possible so that we can do what's necessary in our lives to raise children and pass on our genes. So, if we look back at our species, we are called Homo sapiens, and our species first evolved on the planet about 100,000 years ago. That means our species has been honed in for 5,000 generations. So those genes have stayed in all of us for 5,000 generations. And what that means is that those genes are hardwired in us. It's going to be hard for those genes to come out of our gene pool, okay, because they've been successful for 5,000 years, right? It's like when, something works well on your computer, you keep using it a lot, it becomes pretty easy. You learn a new instrument, those nerve pathways become hardwired. Same things with genotypes and phenotypes. When they're successful, they become hardwired, okay, for 5,000 generations. Now, so we share pretty much identical DNA with everybody else around us who's Homo sapiens, right? Pretty much 100%. And we've all shared that DNA for 5,000 generations. If we look back at our other more distant relatives in the Homo genus, which we are the only surviving member right now, they've been around for 2 million years. Okay, so that's about 50,000 generations. And if you go back and back and back, you can finally get back to chimpanzees, which is about 50 million years ago, where our ancestors split off of chimpanzees. Now, we still share 94% of the same DNA as chimpanzees. So in that 50 million years, all those hardwired genes, right, only 6% has changed. With our hunter-gatherer ancestors that lived 5,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, in most cultures, right, and in some cultures, less, a little over 100 years ago or less, they all lived in this environment, and that is where the genes came from. Okay, these were the instructions on how to adapt to the environment that our ancestors lived in. Now, our genes have not changed radically, but our environment has changed radically. So for a foundation, if we go back to what our genes really live off of and thrive off of, for example, what our ancestors lived off of and thrive off of, that's going to give us a really good starting place, a really good foundation to get to a cleansing of all the other stuff that's changed and that we've put into our bodies and put on ourselves. And then from there, we can start to navigate the world that we're in now and know what it means to really express our genes to their full potential, what it means to really be healthy, how it feels to be healthy. One of the most, probably the greatest thing about this job that I have and sharing the cleanse with people and the patients that have come through this cleanse is seeing that they're surprise on their face when they say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know how good I could feel. I didn't know I could feel like this." And they don't want to go back to their old diet and lifestyle because it changes their lives. And I didn't know this either when I went down to the University of Arizona. I thought I was just like everybody else. I could play football and stuff like that, but I was really out of shape. I was overweight. I had acne. I had all these other problems that were starting to creep up as I got older. And now, 20 plus years later, I'm feeling better and better and better. I'm still doing the stuff that I could do 20 years ago, in addition to raising a family and running a business and all these other things that we have to do as we get a little bit older. So, I'm talking about not just a diet, right? I'm talking about a lifestyle, okay? Because it wasn't just what our ancestors took into their bodies, but it was how they lived. And it was what was around them in their environment as well, okay? What their mind was doing, what their heart was doing, and what their gastrointestinal system was doing, what they were digesting, okay? There's 3 main parts of our body that are really integrated and need to be addressed all at the same time, right? That's our gut, our heart, and our brain. And you really can think of them as 3 brains. In fact, they all have the same neurons that our brain has. They all communicate to each other. They all create hormone releases throughout our body to cause other things in our body to turn on and turn off. So it's not just diet. But if we are going to talk about diet, what kind of diet did our ancestors have? First of all, it was geographically local, okay? So that meant they were eating the freshest possible food available because it was close, right? And it was recently picked out of the ground or recently killed. So that had the most amount of enzymes, the most amount of life in it, the most amount of living bacteria that were on those plants that they had adapted to. And it was minimally processed, right? Okay, at the most, we start to go back into processing. It was like, grinding grains with a mortar pestle or soaking them to sprout them, right? Or cooking our food and cooking our meat. That's very minimally processed food. A lot different than a Twinkie. And most of it was plant-based. And I know this is a little bit controversial. And I know that the paleo diet is very big these days. And I have a lot of things in agreement with paleo diet, but most of my research and most of my thoughts is that we're mostly meant to eat a majority of plant foods, okay? And the reason for that is, if we look at our genotypes, most of our genes are still, related to our distant ancestors. And our distant ancestors lived in the rainforest, okay? The rainforest had very little access to meat, okay? It was mostly access to massive amounts of different types of plants. And it wasn't until we started to migrate away from those to more colder and temperate climates that we needed to rely on more meat, okay? So depending on your own more recent ancestry, like mine is Irish and English, those more kind of temperate latitudes, I might have a little bit more of a tendency to be able to handle things like dairy and more meat in my diet than someone who's still more closely related to someone from a more tropical climate, like from Asia or things like that, okay? So those are some little things that you can use to start to tweak this personally. But to make it as a cleanse, I put everybody on on a vegetarian diet and we go just to plant food for a little while, kind of clean out the system, get you used to what it feels like to have those plant proteins, have your body work off of those, and we can bring in meat later on, but we want it to be really good meat, diverse, wild, and organic meat, which is totally different than the stuff we're finding in most of the stores today. It's a totally different creature. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the lifestyle. We talked already about their healthy diet, right? They had the perfect diet because their bodies adapted to that and they survived and passed those genes on. They were active, moving, doing lots of exercise. Amanda and I were talking about her exercise program now and how good it feels that she's so active and she's so strong and she's doing so much. And that's another thing a lot of people don't realize, how active they can be and how good it feels when we're really, really, really active. And probably when I've felt the best is when I've been able to surf and run every day, you know, day after day after day after day, and it's just like feels so good to have that much movement, and that's because we're meant to move. Our body rewards us, our brain rewards us with neurochemicals like dopamine and serotonin that make us feel happy, make us feel content, make us feel safe, make us feel at ease for doing these things, whether it's eating a healthy diet or it's exercising and really getting our heart rate moving, or probably the most important part right now is decreasing our stress. All right, so I call these three things, these three parts of the lifestyle, the three pillars of success in my cleanse program. All of them are important, all are equally as important, but when you have all three functioning at once, that's when you can really support a good, healthy foundation. And what do you guys think the hardest thing that people have to deal with when they come in and do this at my office? Is it the diet? Is it getting the exercise? No, it's the stress. People cannot slow down. They have a really hard time calming their mind and relaxing and taking the time for themselves to do that. You know, especially moms, especially, you know, people who are running businesses and things like that. They have a really hard time slowing down, but it's critical, right? Because our ancestors evolved in an idyllic setting like this. Okay, and the types of stress that they were exposed to were mostly acute stress. Okay, that means like a life-threatening situation that just comes out of the blue and you run or you fight and then it's over. And then you go right back into your baseline. And that's how we need to be. We have a world right now that's surrounding us constantly with low-level chronic stress, right? Whether that is from deadlines or traffic and all those kind of frustrating things, but also any assault to our homeostasis, meaning the balance of our body, can cause a stressful response in our body. So all the toxins, again, in our air, our water, and our soil, our body's perceiving that as a threat, right, and starting to release stress hormones. And it's very easy to get caught in that cycle of constant chronic stress hormones. That will change your ability to eat, that will change your ability to move, that will change your ability to think. So all of these are important when you're considering cleansing and detoxing. You have to take all three of these into account. Get them all working for you. Find out how much of each you need for your body, for you to thrive at your best. All right. Our ancestors had average lifespans of 65 to 75 years. So our genes are there to keep us very active, very fit, at least into our eighth decade. Okay. Most of their deaths were due to illness. That's why anytime something happens to us, we get inflammation, is because that's what our brain is still trying to prevent. That's what killed off most of our ancestors that are no longer around, was illness, right? Infections and things like that. So anything also that disturbs our homeostasis, our balance, our brains kind of trigger happy to send an inflammatory response down to that area. And if that's allowed to go on for too long, that can wear down things in our body as well. Only 20% of their deaths were due to violence and accidents, and only 9% due to degenerative diseases. Degenerative diseases are things like cancer, heart disease, diabetes, all the stuff that's killing people right now in our world. We've done a pretty good job taking care of the illness, although that's about to bite us back. So right now, mostly what we're focused on as a culture is preventing and healing from degenerative diseases, and this is how you do it. Okay. The Industrial Revolution that happened a little over 100 years ago radically changed these aspects of our diet. Okay, our glycemic load, that's how fast blood sugar goes, or sugar goes into our blood from the food that we eat. Our fatty acid profile, you've heard of like omega-3 fatty acids, omega-6 fatty acids, trans fats, all those things have been totally messed up. Our macronutrients, so the amount of protein, the amount of fat, the amount of carbohydrates, that's been all jumbled up from the way our ancestors had it. Our acid-base balance, plants. We evolved in a place that had massive amounts of plants in the rainforest. Plants are basically the ultimate chemists of the world. And there's hundreds, if not thousands of chemicals in that plant right there. And if I go over there to take a little bit of that leaf, all those chemicals are going to go in my body. So my body has developed a way to buffer that, right? And that is, my body wants to be more acidic because most of the chemicals in those plants are basic. So we have all these mechanisms, all these instructions about how to kind of ward off against those basic chemicals in the plants by becoming more acidic. We've now made our diet more acidic. And so we're going further and further out of balance in a very important way. All right. Sodium-potassium balance has also gone completely haywire. We had very little access to sodium. We had a lot more access to potassium in our ancestry, and those are critical nutrients for cell communication. Okay, how cells get things in and out and how they communicate to each other. So problems in sodium-potassium balance cause all sorts of things, of course, like the famous heart disease and heart attacks and strokes. Our fiber content has gone way down. Our plants have been bred to be sweeter, have less fiber, and then we've processed them a lot by taking a lot of the fiber out of our diets. I think some of the recommendations from the cardiologists today recommend 40-50 grams of fiber today. They think our ancestors were consuming closer to like 150 to 200 grams of fiber a day. So we're way behind. And that's going to affect the motility of our digestive system. It's also going to affect the organisms that live there. A lot of the organisms that we want to get into our body to help our intestines work properly, which also affects our immune system and also helps us digest our food, they need that soil, right? They need those nutrients in there. And a lot of those nutrients that they need are fiber. And so you might hear Rob or Rishi talk about prebiotics and other types of things that they're mixing in with their foods to make sure that those bacteria have a good home and plenty of food to eat so that they can grow inside of us. All right, so we talked a little bit about glycemic load. That's a whole wheat bagel. That has one of the highest glycemic loads that I've been able to find. Okay, and glycemic load, they took 1 teaspoon of pure sugar and dumped it, had somebody eat it, and then measured the rise in their blood sugar. And then they measure everything against that. And so this was like 75-85% of just having pure sugar. We've actually made food that raises the blood sugar faster than just pure sugar. So we've actually made food that can put more sugar into our blood than just eating sugar. What is that, right? That's a drug. Okay? What is that? Does that look like sugar? Yeah. Does that act like sugar? Yeah. Is it addictive like sugar? Yeah. That's heroin. Works on the exact same addiction mechanism that sugar does in our bodies. And I know it sounds crazy, but it's true, unfortunately. And when you look at changing your diet and changing your lifestyle or changing your stress levels, you have to look at addiction, because this is an addictive process that we're all thrown into. Basically, we've all grown up in this culture for the most part, as far as I know, right? And we've been addicted from the beginning. Since we came out of our mother's wombs, we've been given addictive substances, and we've been put on this train of getting more and taking in more and taking in more and taking in more. And it might not even be sugar. Like I said, a bagel, we think of that as a health food. Hey, it's a whole wheat bagel. That's even a healthy health food, right? Not the way our body sees it. That's a sugar, okay? And so it's going to cause those releases of dopamine and serotonin and norepinephrine that tell our body, like, yeah, you got a really good animal there. Or you found a really great plant that's high in all this nutrients. Way to go. Here's all these chemicals. Whoa, that's a lot of chemicals. And you feel really high, right? And then you crash. Or you see it happen with kids all the time. Just like a drug. And that's what you have to look at this stuff like, as drugs. So I recommend, and what I do in my program is slowly weaning people off of their old diet and gradually getting them more onto this natural cleansing diet, okay? And they start to notice these changes pretty quick in their life, and that's the inspiration that helps them get to the next step, okay? All right, so what are the 3 conditions necessary to create an addiction? And this comes from psychiatrists that are studying addiction right now. You need a susceptible organism, an addictive substance, and stress. Humans are a susceptible organism. Sugar is an addictive substance, as is fat and as is salt. Okay, all of them cause hormonal releases and peptide releases in our brains that can set up an addictive behavior and reward us for consuming them. Because our ancestors, when they came across those, that was a very nutrient-dense food. So they came across a very sweet load of fruit, or they came across an animal with a lot of fat on it, or they came across something with a lot of minerals in it and tasted salty to them. So they were rewarded for that. And that's where all of our addiction comes from. Our brain rewarding us for our behavior. Our behavior evolved in an environment that is radically different than the one that's been created around us today. Recent additions to all of this are pesticides, factory farming, chemical fertilizers, genetically mutated organisms, and unfortunately the list just keeps going on, and they keep adding to all these new things we now have to be exposed to. And right now, 72%, almost 3/4 of what we consume as humans on this planet consists of things that our ancestors had no exposure to, that our genes don't really know how to deal with. And that's dairy, cereals, refined sugar, refined vegetable oils, and alcohol. So all of those things we're taking in so much. Most of our diet is made up of things that our genes are just like, hey, what do we do with this? And of course that causes problems, right? In addition to that, 4 million man-made chemicals identified since 1965. 70,000 are currently in production. 6,000 new ones identified each week. 3,000 added to food. Over 400 identified accumulating in human tissues, including placental tissue. And then we see all the signs around our state saying that these chemicals are known to cause cancer and birth defects, but we're not doing anything about it, right? But, first we have to take care of ourselves. When we get our health going and we get balanced, then we can start to do the necessary work to work together to kind of change this so that we prevent these from going into our environment instead of having to fight against them after they already get in there. Chronic disease affects most adults. All these numbers have been rising since I made this PowerPoint, probably about 3 or 4 years ago. Cardiovascular disease still rising, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, cancer. When I was a kid, when my parents were my age, I think it was 1 in 7 was your chances of getting cancer. So in that time of about 30, 40 years, now it's become 1 in 2 actually is the new statistic for men, and females are closely behind that soon. So cancer is getting worse and worse, and especially childhood cancers are one of the main ones, and obesity is just nuts. Childhood obesity rates are just skyrocketing exponentially. So is diabetes. And most of the scientists are saying, well, we just don't understand why this is happening. Well, there's also bioaccumulation, right? We talked about the fat loads. And we talked about how, if you're breastfeeding your child, which is still the best food that you can give an unborn baby, they're going to receive 65% of your toxic load. The reason that is because they get so much of the fat that's in the mother, right? Our fat is our protection system from all these toxic chemicals that we're surrounding ourselves with. And that's most of our fat is in our brain, our breasts, our testes, adrenals, liver, and pancreas, right? Lots of problems going on with those organs in a lot of our patients and a lot of the people we see around us, a lot of our family members, if not ourselves. Then a lot of these chemicals are also endocrine disruptors. So they disrupt the communication system between our bodies about how much estrogen we should make, when we should make estrogen, or when we should make testosterone, and disrupt all of our hormones, which are powerful messengers. Okay? And you can find these in all the plastics, right? All the bleaches and coolants and electronics. And so they mess up everything coming from our brain and major glands in our brain and our thyroid and our pancreas and our adrenals. Some of the new research, too, that you're going to start to hear about shortly, if you haven't already, is obesogens. They are now starting to find out that a lot of these chemicals that have been around us are also causing obesity. So not only can eating too much sugar and not exercising enough and having too much stress in your life cause obesity, but just the toxins themselves that are around us can trigger our genes to produce too much fat. Recent research is also suggesting that that may be a factor in diabetes as well. And these are some of the reasons why these things are spiking. Autoimmune diseases are really going off the charts right now. In fact, there's more people right now in the country with autoimmune diseases and heart disease and cancer combined. Okay? And there's probably, I haven't come across anything in the literature yet specifically for specific toxins. That'll probably come out. My thoughts on that is that a lot of that has to do with the levels of stress causing problems with our communication and our hormones, okay, and our body's ability to communicate. Some of the new research in autoimmunity suggests that not only does your body have to make a mistake about causing a reaction to one of your own tissues, but it has to have that feeling of stress, that feeling of danger. And they've identified molecules that they call danger signals, and there's like 4 or 5 of them that the brains and tissues release to communicate that feeling of stress between them. They're like little tiny peptide molecules. And then the research that has been suppressed in this country but is coming out in Europe and the rest of the world on genetically mutated organisms, the most common problem there is allergies and autoimmune problems. So if you combine the stress in our world with the genetically mutated organisms in our environment, I think that is going to be the main thing about why there's so much autoimmunity going on right now in our country. And I know that's, it's kind of a dark subject as you get into this and you look at it, and it can be overwhelming. But if you're going to do this, or I always tell my patients to turn off the news, right? That's one of the first things, and turn off the TV. Decrease your stress levels, and a lot of this stuff can be stressful. Okay. So that being said, it can be overwhelming to take all of this on at once, right? It can be overwhelming to think about the state of the world and state of the toxicity and things like that. That causes stress responses. So this is how you can kind of navigate into this world. It's like, okay, I'm starting to feel stress. Well, that's too much for me to be in a non-stressed mode, right? Which really is a regenerative mode. Okay, if your body's stressed, it's degenerating your body, it's wearing it down. If your body is relaxed, it's regenerating your body and rebuilding your tissues. And that's what we need to do to combat all these things that we're up against. So, start with yourself. Get yourself healthier, get on this path, learn what you need to learn, and then as you do, then as there are more and more people like us out there getting healthier, we can show that, hey, there's a much better way to live. So that when I was 15, somebody like me would have walked down the street and, or I would have seen them eating a salad or tofu or a smoothie or something like that, that might have piqued my interest and said, well, why does that person eat that way? And why do they look so healthy? And why do they have so much energy? Right? That's the beginning. We got to create the world that we want. This world has been created by our ancestors, right? Our recent ancestors. It's up to us to create the world that we want to live in, and it all starts with us. First working on ourselves, not letting ourselves get too stressed, and when we're in that nice regenerative state, that's when we can really be effective in the world around us.